Bienvenidos a este primer evento del último día de la Semana Internacional de India en la Universidad del Bosque. Esta ha sido una estrategia de internacionalización del campus para traer al mundo a la universidad. Ya son 17 ediciones que se han realizado de la Semana Internacional en nuestra universidad y en esta ocasión celebramos a India como un país del que se puede aprender mucho en muchas disciplinas, del que se puede apropiar también mucho sobre su cultura y sobre diversos temas en muchas ciencias y muchas disciplinas. Quiero pues dar inicio a este primer espacio que tiene que ver con paisajes habitados. Muchas gracias por asistir. Ya el profesor ya hará su debida presentación y tendremos un invitado internacional también conectado desde India, ¿cierto? Desde India precisamente para enriquecer un poco el espacio. Pero sobre todo quisiera dejarles la invitación a que sigan aprovechando la jornada de la Semana Internacional de India que termina el día de hoy. Después de este espacio tendremos en la carpa, en la plazoleta principal, pues una carpa donde pueden hacer como diversas dinámicas sobre India, pueden ganar algunos premios. Después de ello tendremos otro evento aquí de la Facultad de Creación y Comunicación sobre diseño intercultural. Tendremos un taller de mandalas también aquí en el auditorio a las 4 de la tarde, en el que pueden participar. Y hay un cine club a las 2 de la tarde en el auditorio central con una película bastante interesante del hombre que movió la montaña, una película de India. Así que están cordialmente invitados a seguir disfrutando de esta programación y de esta semana. Muchísimas gracias por su asistencia y bueno, aquí le dejo la palabra al profesor.
Muchas gracias. Primera noticia, por los que no sabían, esta conferencia va a ser en inglés. Entonces yo les voy a empezar a hablar desde ahorita, hacer la introducción en inglés. Si hay algún problema con el entendimiento, pues me pueden hacer preguntas, me pueden avisar. Yo creo que más bien al final, pero si hay algo urgente, mientras tanto, pues trataremos de parar y hacer la aclaración necesaria, ¿no? Y al final, la idea es que podemos tener una pequeña discusión en donde pueden hacer sus preguntas, sus comentarios, y yo con mucho gusto pues hago la traducción si es necesario. Entonces, muy bienvenidos todos. Mi nombre es Stan van der Maas, para los que no me conocen, soy docente aquí del programa de arquitectura, dicto clase en octavo, noveno, décimo semestre, entonces muchos de ustedes no me han visto todavía, creo, algunos sí. Soy holandés y el invitado también lo conocí cuando estamos estudiando, él también es de Holanda, pero se fue a trabajar en la India. So, I'm switching to English now. Robert, welcome to our conversation. I'm going to make a small introduction. Try to keep it not too small, but not too large either, because I want to take the opportunity to make a sort of a theoretical or historical introduction for our students, which are mostly from early part in their architecture studies. So, Robert and I met when we were both studying architecture in the early 2000s in Delft in the Netherlands. I think when we met, he had just arrived from his exchange program. He went to study in India. I think, well, I got to know him then as a person or an architect who was already very sensitive about his decisions, very conscious, and someone who would interiorize the conditions of the brief or of the project before starting to make design decisions. And he, I don't know why exactly he went or why he chose to go to India, but at the time we were all still very much concerned with architects like Rem Koolhaas, Herzog and de Meuron, Zaha Hadid, people from, let's say, from a very international, with a very international scope and approach to architecture, which would be considered like the continuation of what was modernism at the time, or postmodern architecture. So he went to India, and there's a very famous school in India, which is SEPT in Ahmedabad, um, which has actually buildings from people like Balkrishna Doshni or Louis Kahn, and also Le Corbusier was involved um, in constructing in construction of the buildings in Ahmedabad, and of course more famously in other places in India. Um, so this is a very interesting moment in let's say in architectural history, when the ideas of modernism or modern architecture, um, which had been started more over a century ago, uh, and actually were dubbed or gathered with the name of the International style, like an architecture that would propose something universal or generic, or an approach to architecture which would um, be like scientific and serve for everyone. Um, but when modern architecture started to became more and more famous, or more and more adopted, it had to, or it arrived to different territories, not only Northern Central Europe or North America, but also started to become practiced in other places of the world, and was confronted with different contexts and cultures. So I think this happens maybe in two ways, or three ways. In one way is that people that would work, or have worked with architects like Le Corbusier, would go back to their, like international people would go back to their countries and start practicing. So we have the famous example here in Colombia of Rogelia Salmona or Germán Samper, who had worked with Corbusier and then started applying those principles, but also adapting those principles of modern architecture to the local context. So that's one way. The other way is directly by the offices themselves, like Louis Kahn constructing in India, or Le Corbusier working in Northern Africa, or actually also in Bogota with the Plan Piloto, or in Chandigarh in India. And then there might be a third a way in which local architects would just start to learn from those experiences and adapting to or applying those principles in their local context. So this movement, or this idea of adapting modern architecture or principles of modern architecture, was later dubbed critical regionalism as a movement, let's say, or as a critical stance towards how modernism would, or modern architecture could evolve in the later second part of the 20th century. The people who started or came up with this term were Alexandre Chonis and Liane Lefebvre, which were also, at the time that we were students, active professors in Delft. And I think Robert actually worked on some investigations with Liliane Lefebvre at the time. So he also, so back to Delft, and we met after his trip to India. Robert started to work on his graduation project under the guidance of a British architect, which is Tony Fretton, which is also known for this more contextual approach to architecture, more tectonic or phenomenological approach, or thinking about materiality, especially about context, and also about the idea of a human-centered architecture and in a social dimension of architecture, which contrasts with the idea of international, global, starchitect architecture, right? So this was another influence I think we could trace in the work of Architecture Brier, which is going to show us today. So there was this idea that we should neither go for the anonymous or generic approach of pure modernism, neither should we go for this over-stylistic or historical approach that was promoted by postmodernism. And Kenneth Frampton, he took over this term, or he adopted this term of critical regionalism in the early 1980s, saying that architecture could be a dialectic, it could both take into account principles of modern architecture as well as local context. So an architecture that is contextual, that responds to nature in a way which later, of course, involved the idea of responding to climate conditions, specific climate conditions, and the whole idea of sustainable architecture. And where we would have an interest in tactile qualities or material qualities over visual qualities. So in a way, I would like to invite all of you not just to consume this conference as a way of consuming visual images, but also try to understand what is behind the process of these design projects. So if trying to round up here, none of the current, let's say, renowned architects, if we look at the winners of the Pritzker Prize of the last decade, let's say, there are much more figures like Francis Kere or inclusive also Balkrishna Doshi. We have Alejandro Aravena and all these people, and some Chinese architects or RCR architects from Spain, which are much more involved in this idea of critical regionalism, but they do not really explicitly state like we are critical regionalists. We're just architects who try to do our best effort to make socially engaged and environmentally engaged or climate responsive architecture. And I would guess that Robert's or Architecture Brio's work fits very well in this narrative. Maybe he will not say that he is a critical regionalist, but I think his work also evolved into a much more intuitive and natural way of applying these principles. So that's basically what I would like to share with you, and so you can sort of contextualize the work we're about to see. Finally, final remarks. In this whole discussion, our architecture program was founded around 10 years ago, and it was also based on these same principles, where sustainability should not be part of like a specialization or a master's course, but actually should be central to architectural education. So we have this concept of the intertropical region, which is the planetary zone, which is between the two, I forgot the names, the Trópico del, the Tropic of Cancer and the Tropic of Capricorn, right? So the zone central to the equator. And this is a different. This is actually where we have to start thinking about what principles or what are the underlying principles of sustainability, so we can adapt them to local context. Colombia is just above the equator, as you know. India, let's say the north of Colombia sort of coincides in latitude with the south point of India. And we both have important mountain regions. So this whole idea of bringing the work of Architecture Brio to today, or to show you today, is so we can learn from a different context, but different cultural context, but with very similar issues that should be resolved, not just, let's say, geographically, but also socially or economically, which are both developing countries in this way. So I will leave it there. Robert, well, of course, I had to mention that Architecture Brio, and over the last 20 years, has gained let's say a central, I don't know how to formulate well, but a space in the Indian architectural scene. They have been consistently counted or among the most influential architectural practices of India by the Architectural Digest. They have um, been awarded. Their work has been awarded with different in different ways. Also for their interior architectural design. So the students from interior architecture very much welcome here today as well. Is the presentation ready? Yes. So we can, Robert, if you want to take it from here. At the end,
Yes.
we'll be back to do some discussion or questions.
Thank you, Stan. Thank you for the introduction, and I hope you can all hear me.
That sounds great.
Yeah. It's wonderful to be here today with all of you. Thank you for Universitat del Bosque and also the Embassy of India for the invitation. I'm really looking forward to sharing our work with you and hope to engage in an interesting dialogue afterwards. And thank you, Stan, for the introduction and taking me back to almost 30 years ago, I think, when we were studying in Delft and all the different topics we were discussing over a glass of wine. I'll also start the presentation with the beginning where we started. Yeah, unfortunately, the technology doesn't allow me to share directly from my screen, so I'll have to interrupt the presentation saying next. So now it's the time to go to the next slides. And this is a picture of the tiny little village where I grew up, which is called Mareze. It's in the south of the Netherlands. And next, I went on to study in Delft at the architecture school. Next. Yes, this is the picture of the model room in Delft. You can go to next. And this was at a time, the era of what you could call super Dutch architecture. This was an interesting period because architecture started questioning conventional briefs and programs and propose alternatives. And by layering and recomposing program in different ways, new typologies were developed that were either commentaries on society or propose alternative futures. It had, in a way, the ambition to deal with some of the critical challenges of the time. However, the strong emphasis on the clarity of the concept also resulted in a sort of a loss of the experiential and the physical quality of architecture. Architecture lost its relation to the process of making. Next. And a building rather resembled exactly what the blue foam model looked like, then emerging out of the logic of constructing. Next. The architecture demanded attention to itself, and the ambition of architecture was to become a spectacle with the clear intent to be new, to not be like anything else, to be detached from history and context. An nostalgic architecture. Did I escape the Netherlands? Well, I wouldn't say it was an escape, but a quest for a different kind of inspiration led me elsewhere. Like Stan mentioned, an exchange program led me to SEPT in India, the university founded by Pritzker Prize-winning architect B.V. Doshi, where Shefali, my partner, graduated from. Next. Well, in Delft, as a student, you were kind of left alone to chart out your own path and explore your own interests among a multitude of viewpoints. In SEPT, you can actually go back one slide. In SEPT, the direct teacher-student experience prevailed. It was a tranquil garden of ideas where you learned from your gurus. Here, an architecture was taught that was contextually spirited, environmentally informed, structuralist, and modernist at heart. But it was also a place that was on the edge of being dogmatic due to a close-knit teaching and learning culture. Next. And in our quest for architecture that whispered rather than shouted, that sought continuity instead of attention, our journey led us to Sri Lanka. There, in the studio of Chana Daswata, we immersed ourselves in the world of Jeffrey Bawa. Maybe you've never heard of Jeffrey Bawa, but I would certainly recommend to look up his work. Next. And Bawa's genius lay in a paradox. He didn't impose on nature, he let nature dictate. And the wild beauty of Sri Lanka became the muse, shaping his designs in concepts and eventually, literally, overtaking the buildings. Next. And this is a great example of that. Close study revealed that the deceptive simplicity of Baba's creations, what seemed effortlessly natural, were in fact a product of meticulous interventions. The Kandalama Hotel, for example, is a masterpiece playing the disappearing act. By the way, this was built in the 1980s. And next, behind the lush greenery, lay actually a very utilitarian scheme. You can see that from the plan here, very straight geometric lines, and its columns and beams were anchored violently into the rock surfaces of the surrounding forest. The architecture did twist and turn here and there to accommodate itself to nature. Next. But in no way did nature, although helped along its way by the human hand, stop doing what it does best. It adapts, it evolves, it improvises, and it surprises. Next. One of the masterpieces of Jeffrey Bawa, also the Luna Ganga Garden, something that he's worked on for over 30 years, is of course one of the highlights in his oeuvre. More so because it's not really about buildings here. Next. The garden is about light. It's about scale, proportion, and time. So while it's not actually about buildings, it is about architecture. Next. So imagine our surprise during one of our visits when a heavy downpour next turned this checkerboard hardscape into a submerged masterpiece. Next. Lake, garden, and architecture now, even though temporarily, harmoniously collapsed into one, with this lake level rising just at the right level of the stone pavements. Next. Baba did not subjugate nature into the will of man, but in a way it transformed our experience of nature. Through contrast, he highlighted the rawness and unpredictability of nature. Next. Apart from one of his last projects, the Marissa House, here on the screen, Baba's work relies heavily on vernacular typologies and construction methods. And in that way, a proponent of what you and Stan mentioned already, critical regionalism. While the relationship with the land were innovative and always surprising, typologies and spatial configurations were often not, and construction techniques neither. Bauer was not interested in architecture being a product of conceptual thinking. Next. So in 2006, we moved to Mumbai, which you see here on the screen, a city with about 25 million people. And we started our own practice. Imagine the contrast between the little village in Marese and the nature of Sri Lanka. But we were looking to practice, prioritizing context in building form, which we appreciated so much in Sri Lanka. At the same time, the world was changing, urging us to explore alternative approaches rooted in conceptual thinking. Next. Today, our office houses about 40 to 50 architects in Mumbai and in Rotterdam. The diversity of conditions we face from Europe to Asia demands constant adaptation. Next. While a place like, for example, the Netherlands, here a picture of city Rotterdam, where we live and work in, has so far been spared of the reality of the globalized world, especially its increasing peaks and valleys of wealth concentration that you see elsewhere. In India, there we deal with the extremes in the economic status of our clients. This makes one constantly have to adapt, switch positions, and negotiate. Exposing yourself to these diverse situations gives you the opportunity to build relationships and then weave stories between them. It makes you flexible, it makes you agile. Next. One of the most attractive aspects of working here in India is the immense variety of conditions you can expose yourself to. um, for example, next, here in this project, the users of the project were the butterflies of Sikkim, a state with an astonishing variety of butterflies, but that are currently increasingly under threat due to climate change. Next. Or here, homeless communities in a self-initiated project. Next. We've also designed high-end homes. Next. And we've even built a house for dolls in a 1:6 scale. Next. Or here we worked with a variety of group users in the design of a public promenade. This is in collaboration with a group of like-minded architects in our neighborhood called the Bandra Collective. Next. The Carter Promenade was a place for a quiet evening stroll, attracting the elderly and the middle-aged residents of the wealthy neighborhood of Bandra. We propose to build a skate park here as an act of social disruption. Next. Well, the authorities actually didn't allow a skate park to be built on the promenade for the fear of injuries and being blamed for it themselves. They did allow an amphitheater to get built for performances. So that was our workaround. Next. And what ended up happening is that the skate park changed this exclusive nature of the promenade. Now small kids, young men and women from both the underprivileged communities as well as the well-to-do, they join in sport that binds them together and breaking down cultural barriers that exist within the communities. The elderly enjoy the new addition to the promenade as well, watching the stunts and vibrant activity at the skate park. Next. Our first project was commissioned by the organization Magic Bus. Next. This organization realized that children in the city were the worst affected by the scarcity of space due to startling densities. Next. And what started out with some ad hoc sports coaching and mentoring by the founder, Matthew Spacey, became a nationwide program reaching 3.5 million children. The boys and the girls in the program learned discipline, improved self-esteem, hygiene, and the benefits of working in a team in a healthy, competitive environment. Next. The first phase of an outdoor learning center for this NGO was designed by Raul Mrotra, where Shefali initially worked. Next. And we developed a project that was a composite of two programs. It was partly a building and partly a challenge course. An interactive building that is used as a gathering space and play area. We located the learning pavilion over here, next, on a confluence of 4 important landscape elements. Next. On the confluence of a small hill on the left, a stream right next to it, a playful field to the bottom of the drawing, and on the right side, a river. Next. These elements are emphasized by strategically placing the various activities of the learning pavilion on either side of the banks of the stream. Next. And then the roof straddles across these different landscapes, tying them together. Next. The learning pavilion is a building with the purpose of, in abstract terms, educating children about overcoming challenges in life, overcoming their boundaries. And it's an extension of the existing challenge course on the campus. Next. Play. Children learn to work with each other in teams to achieve goals. By helping each other, they figure out how they can work in teams. Next. Natural breeze flows from the river and cools the covered spaces. And during the monsoon months, the pavilion becomes a dry space to take cover from the heavy rains, and the stream below comes alive. Next. Often children's play spaces are associated with bright colors. But here we wanted to emphasize on the experience of the natural environment surrounding. Next. And the classroom becomes the outdoors, becomes nature, and nature becomes the classroom. Next. While the Learning Pavilion was a project that resulted out of a more, let's say, traditional model of a client-led architectural commission, the next project is the result of a self-initiated practice. And what motivated us to do these projects? Next. Well, we realized that when it comes to the quality of life of ordinary citizens, we as architects had become irrelevant. Here in Mumbai, for example, in this housing estate on the screen, it was meant to actually improve the living conditions of, let's say, the slum dwellers or the informal city dwellers. The architect has become an agent of twisted bylaws, and to be honest, has no other option but to be that agent. Next. And these are the conditions that architects are engaging in. And of course, then they lose credibility in the meantime. How can they design something like this? If we want to regain a position of relevance, we need to push ourselves as architects to redefine our ways of operating. How can architects transform themselves from merely competent executors of assignments into entrepreneurs and producers? Next. This building doesn't have running water, for example. The girl has to pull up the water through this can with a simple improvised pulley system. But we can't only wait for clients to call us. Instead, can we create demands and opportunities? So here in this project, we collaborated with Billion Bricks and set up a dedicated design studio within our office to address the urgent issue of homelessness in India. And this with one mantra: never to design poorly for the poor. Next. This is a picture of a typical village in India. It's on the perpetual construction, perpetual disrepair, and beleaguered by overcrowding. And trying to think through this problem of the lack of adequate housing, we started thinking on a much larger scale, looking at the massive shortage of housing that exists around the world. Next. The problem is daunting. 1 billion people do not have adequate housing, and this figure will only double by 2030. 650 million homeless people live in rural areas, and 85% of them do not have access to financing. Next. In India alone, according to the government, there is a deficiency of 40 million rural homes. And then this is what the government actually thinks will be the solution. Just build enough concrete boxes and subsidize the construction. Of course, the goal of 40 million homes is impossible to reach. However, even if you manage to solve this complicated puzzle of housing, straddling financing, access to land, and resolving unimaginable material supply chains, we create one more major problem. Next. How do we supply electricity to all these homes? So we calculated that it would require actually 5 new large coal power plants, requiring $10 billion investment to power those homes. And worse, imagine 370 railroad cars of coal per day to be consumed to power those power plants. This way, India would definitely not meet the Paris climate targets. Next. We thought, what if we would create solar plants? Solar plants which actually require huge amount of land, but at the same time, housing also requires a similar amount of land. So we thought, why not combine these challenges and build homes underneath solar farms? Next. When we see a solar farm like this, we see next, free roofs. Next, waiting to be inhabited. This is the village of Matagaon. Next, it's 300 kilometers east of Mumbai, where the first prototype for this house was built. Next. Like almost all rural sites, access and distance to a city with large equipment is a challenge. So this kind of high-tech solution of prefab ready homes would be ridiculously inappropriate. But prefabrication is paramount to build at speed and quality. So we reinvented the idea of prefabrication. Next. We needed to miniaturize the prefab elements so that they could be assembled without the need of a crane. The support structure is made of prefab concrete blocks that gets bolted together with nuts and bolts on sides. Next. And then we developed a column system that consists out of small blocks that weigh less than 20 kilograms and therefore easy to carry. And this concrete acts as a mass. Next. And then a central rod that is screwed to tighten the blocks together takes all the tension. Next. I think this video doesn't work, but we tested this ease of assembly, there you are, of the system. And in one day, all 8 columns were erected by the local villagers who didn't have any prior training. A connector plate with a threaded female joint tightens and compresses the concrete blocks. And in half a day, the steel roof structure was placed on top of the columns to brace them. Next. Here, the completed house in the village context. Next. And this project has a huge potential to scale up and reach a large number of communities around the world. But what I think is most special about this project, next, is that families in Power Height will become the pioneers towards a sustainable future. And they'll actually live in a house that is more future ready than the ordinary people like you and I live in. Next. And here are a few more photographs of the prototype in Aurangabad. Next. 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 We're now working on scaling this up to the level of communities of 125 homes, which produce a totality of 2.5 megawatt power. Next. Now, most of our projects are located in some very unique natural landscapes. Because of rapid urbanization, our sense of isolation from and the loss of the natural world grows. And simultaneously, our desire for a place away from the life in the city increases. So people, they have an inherent yearning to retreat to those undisturbed parts of the planet in order to restore the sense of loss. But how do we build in pristine natural landscapes? There is a dilemma that every architect faces when starting work on a new site. Next. Should one not leave the site alone? Why touch it? Why spoil it? The problem with this, though, is that if we believe, as William Cronon puts it in The Trouble with Wilderness, that nature is where we people are not, we actually give ourselves the permission to evade the responsibilities for the lives that we actually lead in our everyday urban environments. If we designate the wild places as sacred, we in effect also say that our backyards, our roadside trees, our neighborhood parks that they are not valuable. Now, I would like to step back for a minute and elaborate a bit more in detail what we mean when we use the words nature and landscape. Firstly, I would like to establish that when we say nature, it is not actually what you would presume it to be, raw, untouched nature. In fact, as Simon Sharma elaborates in his book Landscape and Memory, there's no word for raw, untouched, unseen nature. It does not, and it cannot exist. Because as soon as the human eye lays its eyes on it, that which is raw is immediately transformed to a landscape, framed and well as in a painting in a museum. Next. One could actually say that nature is as ephemeral as Eurydice. Seeing nature immediately implies that it vanishes. It becomes cultured and it becomes created. Landscapes are culture before they are nature. They are constructs of the imagination projected onto wood and water and rock. What you see with your eyes is defined by what your parents, your great-great-grandparents, romantic poets in the 18th century, and the first Homo sapiens planting a seed and starting the agricultural revolution, what they saw in nature. And their fears, their adoration of the sublime, and their greed filters what you see. It filters your gaze. Next. Still, however, we are attracted to those pockets of landscapes that seem close to what we imagine wilderness would have looked like. We desire those places that we imagine we experienced in our childhood once more. And we want to relive those feelings, even though they are derived out of a sort of a clouded memory of wholeness of something that never existed in the first place. Next. Next. This here is a place not far from the metropolitan area of Mumbai. Imagine the contrast with the picture of Mumbai that I actually showed a while ago. And from these hills, numerous rivers and streams find their way down through an undulating landscape, eventually feeding into the Bombay Bay. Our clients wanted to build a home here, and they were not the first, and they would certainly not be the last either. And with this landscape slowly filling up with self-important villas, they would easily become a part of the problem. So we asked ourselves, will we be able to create different relationships between the new settlers and the rural landscape? How do we intervene in this landscape, the home of farmers for over centuries, but now the playground of urban citizens? Next. Can the building be made barely visible? Next. Here, the roof of the house settles just below the top of the hillock, camouflaging itself in the silhouette of the undulating landscape. But also, next, sitting just high enough to be able to measure oneself against the landscape, the winding river, and the mountain range in the distance. Next. This house is a combination of several typologies. Next. It's an underground house. Next. A courtyard house. Next. And it's a veranda house. And next, a lookout post. Next. A courtyard in the center. Next. Forges a connection with the roof and travels through the interior of the house, extending past the pool into the landscape. And it ties together terrain and architecture through an experiential movement. Next. The sequence of a rock-carved courtyard. Next. Kitchen, dining room. Next. Veranda, screen, deck, pool, and riparian landscape is a sort of an experiential one. But it also acts as an instrument to measure oneself against the vastness of space. Next. Now, the climate here is unforgiving. Apart from the short winter, It's either scorching hot and dry, next, or the rain drops down from the sky with tremendous destructive power. Next. The natural landscape changes from a dense, brightly colored green, jungle-like forest during the monsoon months to a pale brown, shrubbery wasteland during the summer months. Next. Our landscape design helped through the plantation of drought-tolerant fountain grasses. Next. It mitigates this transition throughout the seasons and a seamless transition to the surrounding river landscape. The veranda is an essential element of life in this climate. Next, the bamboo screen acts as a filter, but it also creates a sense of privacy from prying eyes in the distance. Next. You can play this. The building is made to age and weather. There's something sublime in this dramatic collision between the order of geometry and the unpredictability of nature. And at the intersection of both, it choreographs ruin or decay. It meditates upon the inevitability of time and the forces of nature. It sort of indulges in a bittersweet sensation within which one can find both joy and comfort. Next. The character of the house on the stream is a very different. Next. It is designed around a stream that is the protagonist around which everything revolves. By breaking up the house in actually two parts and placing them on either side of the banks, the stream becomes omnipresent. Next. The bridge and the pergola that connects the two buildings stimulates and it even forces the users to move out of the comfort of the interior and experience the outsides several times during the day. It makes you live more in the moment. Next. And Tennessee Williams said about this, life is all memory, except for that one present moment that goes by so quick, you can hardly catch it going. Next. The pool here acts as a sort of an extension of the stream, but then in the summer months when the stream dries up, it's a substitute for it. Next. The outside shell and the inside shell are distinctly different. The internal spaces are defined with volumes created by the changing thickness of the internal ceiling. Next. It's poché. It describes the space inside the walls and the ceilings, the space between the inner and the outer shell. And here it is part of the drawing technique as well. The exterior form responds to the side elements of the existing trees and the stream, while the interiors have their own logic. Next. The heaviness of the exterior concrete mass is sort of reversed by the lightness of the whitewashed walls and ceilings. Next. And then large sliding doors, which span from floor to ceiling and wall to wall, bring the outside into the interiors. Next. Architecture is delicately balancing on a small footprint. Next. It's almost as the found boulder in the landscape. Here, one of our inspirations of this dreamlike landscape of Hampi that you can find in South India. It is solid and timeless due to its almost bunker-like character. Next. The homogeneous materialization emphasizes the sculptural quality of the house that is molding itself about the site. And by lifting the tips of the wings off the ground, the relationship with the landscape is paradoxically strengthened. And here, the contradiction between architecture and nature is actually highlighted. Here, the pleasure of the building does not lie in the denial, but rather in the celebration of the collision of these two. Next. Concrete a material that is solidified, shaped by the textures of its contraform, has a beautiful, poetic quality. But building with it, in a way, also felt like a sin, because the high embodied energy of concrete is certainly not sustainable. Building our first house that we designed with this material made us more acutely aware of some of the challenges that India faces. Raw materials for basic construction are increasingly harder to procure. Next. It's so bad that the shortage of construction sand leads to undesirable practice like you see here, where it is being mined at the bottom of creeks and rivers. Next. Or causing coastline erosion on the mined beaches around Mumbai. Next. Similarly, construction with bricks causes the topsoil of fertile farmlands to disappear and causes emissions of black carbon polluting the air. Now, our work is not really defined by a singular preference of materials. We live in this age of scarcity, a depletion of material resources and skilled labor. A search for alternative materials led us to experimenting with bamboo, like in the screen in the riparian house we just saw, and later in the artist retreat in Mumbai. Next. Next. In this project, there was one more major concern, though. The coastal nature of the site meant that, due to impending sea level rise, we had to consider building on the land that may not exist in the future. Next. So we researched how could we build in climate resilience. Next. Using building methods that have less impact on the fragile ecosystems. Next. As well as are future ready and could accommodate rising sea levels on the land that floods seasonal already. Next. Now the plan is actually very simple. 2 rooms that are defined merely by rows of columns, and then 2 chopped off pyramid-shaped roofs with 2 skylights that are shifted away from each other. Define these 2 spaces experientially. Next. The typology is loosely based on this, what is called the ambalama that we found in Sri Lanka. Unlike you may think of like the fantastic railway stations that were built in Europe at the time in the 19th century, according to me, this is one of the most beautiful public infrastructure of that century. The structure delicately balances on 4 stone boulders of around a meter in size, and the height of the boulders carefully levels the difference between the slope of the rock surface below and the horizontal plane of the timber above. Space, functionality, tectonics, materialization, and structural essence all converge here. Heavy and down to earth, but transparent and light at the same time. Next. Well, in our project, the stilts, columns, and beams are made in galvanized steel. Next. The roof structure is built of bamboo V-shaped rafters, which are covered by a lightweight sandwich roof. Next. A solar skylight on the top of the roof pulls up the hot air from the space below, encouraging a natural flow of air across the workshops. Next. The skylight brings in light, of course, but it also generates power. Next. And the otherwise distracting solar panels are subtly integrated in the roof design. Next. Here you see the bolted connections that allow it to be disassembled. The structure is also placed on large stone boulders brought from a site nearby that we're working on, and they form the foundation of the structure. Next. Now, bamboo is a wonder material, and I'm sure you all know, being from Colombia, but especially here in India, it frustrates a lot of architects. Next. It's never straight, and it varies in diameter between either ends of the poles. And I'm showing you a picture of the type of bamboo that we get in the local market in Mumbai, because bamboo construction is still at a very nascent stage in India. Go back to the previous. And of course, we could import or transport bamboo from Indonesia or even Colombia, but this would have eliminated all the environmental benefits of a bio-based carbon-absorbing material. So we may do with these kind of crooked, uneven bamboos we got from the local plant nurseries. Next. We designed this diagonal zigzag layout of the rafters to avoid the irregularity of the bamboos from becoming destructive, but also to make a stronger structural frame. Next. And on the right, you see a detail of how the bamboo is tied to the cement board shell. Next. And then here you see how the whole structure comes together. Next. And then here you see how the light moves through these timber panels. Next. Throughout the day and through the nights. Next. Next. Every site has a story. And sometimes it is 1,000,000 years old. Next. The formation of the Himalayas took place about 50 million years ago, when the Indian subcontinent broke away from a larger landmass and then reached Eurasia after a slow journey upwards. Next. And then with a magnificent force, it lifted up the ocean seabed, exposing layers of medium grain metamorphic rock that originated from the mud of the bottom of the ocean. And you find these kind of rock formations everywhere near the site. And it felt therefore very natural to have these become next the basic component of the project. Next. It's not a choice that made our lives easy though. Here you see a dozen old men slowly but patiently work on the stone masonry. First, the stone is quarried from the site itself, from where we excavated the foundation of the house. And then they are shaped into somewhat rectangular blocks. And then they are positioned with a mud lime mix into place. No cement. Next. And then play. Finally, the finishing and then the alignment of these brick blocks is done on the wall itself. Most men are over 50 years old because the art of masonry has slowly disappeared. And most young men have left the village and abandoned the trade. And even though it is unintended, the material does evoke a sense of nostalgia, right? Since it won't be long for this method of construction to become completely obsolete. Next. Here. Go back. You can see on top of one of the roofs the masons that are slowly chipping away on a coping stone. The Himalayas in the background. That's an amazing workplace. Now this is the building tradition in the region. Yeah. This is actually a cow shed or cow, let's say, monastery. Load-bearing stone masonry walls and standing seam iron roofing, the latter introduced by the British. It's not actually nostalgia, I think, that drove this choice of materials. It's not a longing for a sanitized impression of the past. And it's also not a celebration of craft either. I have to be very clear. We are very much aware of the trap of fetishizing craftsmanship. Craftsmanship is often romanticized not only for its supposed superior quality, but because it makes a product exclusive. And this exclusionary quality is why it loses the potential for positive impacts. But when you have the choice of sculpting a building out of the rock on which it is founded, instead of having to cart up truckloads of sand, cement, and gravel from the foothills of the Himalayas, a painful, bumpy, steep 6-hour road trip uphill, it is just plain common sense. Next. The stone elements of this retreat seem to be an extension of the terracing of the Himalayan agricultural terrain. Next. Merely protected and made habitable by a light horizontal roof plane. Next. And then it becomes difficult, or at least we attempt to make it difficult to perceive where architecture stops and landscape elements take over. Next. From one pavilion to another, you walk through a garden. Next. With the roof emphasizing the panoramic views of the Himalayas. Next. Then a path takes you inside the earth. Next. To then appear. Next. On the other side of this solarium-like pavilion that reflects the fruit orchards in its faceted glass facade. Next. The timber roofs that you see here are finished in a standing seam copper roof. And you see here the copper sheets that are being folded from large rolls. Next. They are then laid in between small clips on top of the roof. Next. And then with very simple hand tools, the seams are folded by the South Indian craftsman. Next. Then the edges are turned in a separate piece to protect the end grain of the wood. Next. It's beautiful craftsmanship, but it's not local. The timber structure was made with Himalayan pine, yes, and also by a local carpenter, but it was using German spruce technology. Next. And the copper came from Sweden and installed by the South Indian team and this French specialist that you see on the roof. And although it may appear so, this project is not a continuation of a local building tradition. Next. The carpenters, they had never made a roof with these kind of spans. Next. And the standing seam technology introduced by the British was much more primitive at the time. Next. I think this causes us to reevaluate redefine what local and traditional mean and what our valuation of it is. While for the inhabitants of Uttarakhand, owning a concrete frame house has become aspirational, this retreat acts as a resistance. It offers a critique of both the modern fascination of newness and the no less modern reinvention of tradition. In the off-modern tradition, reflection and longing, estrangement and affection, they go together. Next. I just wanted to ask Stan, is there time for our project to show?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah? Yes. So we'll go ahead with a project called The Ray. Next. This is one of our most recent projects. And we were actually acutely aware that this was going to be the first house built on the hill that you see there. And of course, that comes with some responsibility. Next. Can play this. It was very special that we were so close to the mega city of Mumbai, and that for actually the millions of years since the existence of humankind, nobody had ever built or settled down here. Next. The slopes are steep here. Despite that, it didn't mean that house had to pretend that it wasn't there. Rather than shying away from its presence, the house it could show confidence and yet be respectful of this stunning landscape. Next. The slopes are steep here, which was of course a challenge. And to make the land habitable, we had to create terraces. So we inscribed these terraces into the land and carved out a hook-shaped retaining wall. Next. From the outside, we imagined the house as if we found an old ruin. A few old stone walls, aged and overgrown, and left and abandoned. topped up with just a light pavilion. Next. We left the basalt rock formations exposed that as sort of a long lost memory to around 65 million years ago. Next, when as I said, the Indian subcontinent hadn't touched Eurasia yet and was drifting across the ocean. And this place was actually full of volcanoes. And of course, that's why the basalt rock there. The site looks over a beautiful bay, or as the Portuguese who founded Mumbai would have said, Bombaya. Next. You see here on the foreground patches of paddy fields, a sweeping coastline, and then the clouds reflected in a quiet bay, a hill in the background, and then a long line of skyscrapers far there on the horizon. But we wanted to avoid the concept of this mega panorama to which our era seems to aspire, and replace it by something much more subtle. Instead of a panoramic house, like the Himalayan one, we designed two telescopic pavilions pointed with their most narrow sides to the view. Next. And this allowed us to create a myriad of micro panoramas. Next. One for each season of the year and each hour of the day. Next. Is actually an instrument from which to experience the landscape in different ways. And instead of revealing the panoramic view immediately, the house delays. Next. Teases with glimpses till only at the end, when you reach the pool veranda. Next. 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 And then you look over the sinuous pool, next, reflecting the bay in the distance. Next. Next. A good house is one which has a clear organization. But according to us, a great house is one where you can get lost. Here you can wander around each time discovering a new way to get from one place to another. Next. You can play this. The house is understood as one in which inside and outside identities are interchangeable to the point that the differences are cancelled out. When the doors of the house are open, it is possible to enter and exit continually and turn into the exterior what yesterday was the interior, or the other way around. The path of movement becomes a spider webs or a labyrinth. Next. And I think that's where I would like to end the presentation here. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Robert. I'll get to the front of the stage. So I think this was an extremely poetically beautiful demonstration of your work, Robert. I hope our audience has enjoyed it. I would like to open up the space for some remarks or questions. So let's go ahead. And by the way, there is a small prize from the International office for the most interesting question or participation from our audience. So go ahead.
That's amazing.
Sorry?
I'm saying that's a great incentive.
Yeah. So who wants to comment?
No, pero para que se la hagas en inglés. Lo voy a escribir. Yo no hablo bien inglés.
Oh. So we have a question from one of our professors. Do you believe that in regions of the tropical belt, such as parts of India and all of Colombia, developing projects with non-industrial materials such as stone, bamboo, and raw earth represents a relevant path for contemporary architecture in our countries and for the planet? Is this approach being addressed in schools of architecture in the Netherlands or India?
I think it's absolutely a relevant approach. in India there is again and again, and more so even in recent years, an enormous construction boom going on. Unfortunately, most of the construction happens at rapid speeds, with time being of the essence, where um, most of the times the question of carbon emissions are not being considered. Um, we believe, though, that in exemplary projects, one could show alternatives. And once these alternatives are being recognized, and they do become more and more recognized, that alternative practices can also start flourishing, and that they do become more mainstream. Something that we, for example, tried in the artist retreat. And you see more and more that bamboo construction is used in regular construction projects as well.
And what about the part of the schools of architecture? Are you connected to the education in India, or what you see there?
Um, we see that. One second, I hear my microphone. We see that construction, or that education in India does very much look at alternatives as well. Um, there are a lot of interesting schools, like, for example, the School of Architecture in Ahmedabad, but also schools in Mumbai that do look at alternative practices apart from the regular ones, and also address urban questions. How do we create more equitable societies? And how do we make students aware of their social environments, and what role they could play in this in this question as young architects.
Great. Well, that really aligns with, let's say, the intentions of our program as well. Um, I would like to ask you, Robert, you showed some very social projects, or projects which have a clear intention of improving conditions of the less favored population. Um, then you moved on to show some projects which are really high-end, let's say, um, elite projects, right? For
Yeah.
clients which are on top of the social pyramid. So how do those two poles, let's say, relate in your work? Or do you get informed by one um, type of projects to work on the other, or the other way around? How would you relate those two realities of your practice?
They are indeed quite diverse, those types of projects and extremes. Like I mentioned in my talk early on, um, we may be designing a home like the Power Heights at the cost of one single bathroom marble layout of one of the high-end homes, right? And the questions that come up during discussions with clients, they are of course very diverse and different. It means that you have to reposition yourself when you have to put yourself in a sort of a different framework and think about solutions differently also. But I do also think there's a lot of overlaps, which actually inform sort of these different strategies of working. One is that working on high-end projects allows us to experiment more. It allows us to use materials, or let's say, build in certain costs that you require to do those experiments, that you can then use in practice of alternative practices. And similarly, also, when you talk about costs, and every project is driven by costs, even those high-end projects, the ones that are at extreme tight budgets, they allow us to sort of yeah, think think very critically about what is the essence of a project, and how do those how do you arrive at that essence, and how can you apply that on some of the more, let's say, luxurious schemes as well. And I think you can see in the work that our focus is not on well, it is on for the high-end project. It is a focus on luxury, but a luxury of a very different kind. It is not a luxury of materials or a luxury of using the newest imported materials that you could find on the market. It is more about a luxury of, let's say, a lifestyle. How do you experience a home? How do you live in a home? How do you connect with nature? How do you bring calmness to your living environment? How do you feel at ease? And that is, our vision or our sort of experience in our work very much related to the progression of time, and how changes throughout the time and seasons of the year, how they change and make you aware of your presence in the world.
Thank you. So, questions from the audience? I have to read it as well? Okay. You can read it. Come on.
No, really? Okay, so.
Go ahead.
Okay. Taking into account that architecture is related to art, how do we as architects differentiate our work from another? How do we find that style when creating?
So I'm just going to repeat that question just in case,
Yeah.
okay?
Yeah, please.
Taking into account that architecture is related to art, how do we as architects differentiate our work from the other disciplines? How do we find style when creating, right? Something like that.
Okay. It seems like there are a lot of different questions in one. And one is a question about how architecture and art relates, how the different fields relate to each other. Is that correct? Have I understood that correctly? Maybe you can just confirm that.
Yes.
Yes?
Yes.
Okay. So for art,
Or maybe I would frame the question like what influences an architect to come to certain decisions or to define a specific language or architectural language or an architectural style, which is very clear from the process that you described, that there is a search for a new way or a specific way of doing architecture. So what influences that process?
I think what it influences is, for me at least, a lot of personal experiences. Where I grew up in a small village in Malaysia, studying with Stan at TU Delft, seeing the lectures that we've been exposed to in Delft, but also intentionally going out to travel and exploring different parts of the world. My trip to Japan, to India, all those experiences have informed the way we think about architecture. They become sort of a set of tools that we carry along with us, and they flow through my fingers when I sketch on paper. And of course, when you or when you are in your architecture career working on projects, you also start looking out specifically at what interests you, right? It's not only something that happens to you. There's a certain specific direction in which your interests are guiding you. And so we are now very much interested in how architecture and landscape and in a way the definition between architecture and landscape can disappear. And we try in our projects to find different methods to express that. I think that's what we've tried to show today as well. That there's not just one way to do that. There are multiple ways and multiple directions in which you can take a design to talk about that relationship. And I think also it's very much informed with the dialogues that we have with our clients. As it is very important to not forget that these kind of projects, they're not designed in a sort of a singular way, just in a creative process in the studio. There's a lot of collaboration with craftsmen, with contractors, with builders, with carpenters that also influence how we work. When we work, for example, in the Himalayas, in the house in Sitla, the architecture changed. The kind of material palettes, the um, the limitations of building with certain materials or not using certain materials, the limitations that the carpenters had with building structures, but also what we are bringing from outside. That is what informed the architecture. I hope that somewhat answered your question.
Yes, it did. Thank you very much. Another question from the audience, which I'm going to read, that's fine. ¿Cuál de sus proyectos considera que puede ser nominado a los premios Pritzker? In English.
Yes.
So which of your projects do you think could be nominated for the Pritzker Prize, and why?
That's a great honor to be even asked such a question. Stan, you maybe have set the expectations too high. We are very humble architects, but I don't think it's been built yet, to be honest.
Que no, aún no ha sido construido el proyecto que considera que posiblemente.
Maybe he can say or she can say what she thinks the project should be.
Sí, que sí tú puedes decir cuál te parece que puede ser. Okay. We'll just have to wait, I think, maybe some years to see the answer. Are there any more questions from the audience? No? I think Fabio had asked me about if you are involved in participatory processes with communities in an academic context, right? So is the hydro, what is it called?
Power height.
Yeah, is it developed with universities or other schools, or is it really a private initiative?
It's a private initiative in collaboration with an organization called Billion Bricks, and this organization, of course, is also networked into multiple other NGOs, non-governmental organizations. Not so much in the academic world.
Okay, that's clear. Any more questions? I think we'll leave it at that. Robert, thank you so much for your presentation and your answers. I think it was really, really important for our students. Yeah, applause is fine. Some of them had to leave because they had other academic responsibilities, but others stayed anyway. So Looking forward
Thank you.
to talk to you soon, Robert, and thank you so much for your presentation. And
Thank you and have a
everybody in the
great day.
room, thanks for assisting. Bye.